Hey, my name is Eddie, and I want to welcome you to the Workplace Wellness Series for HR leaders and business owners, sponsored by Smart Dollar. We're so glad you decided to take the leap to better yourself as a business leader and as a leader of people. Now listen, everyone has skills, talents, and passions, all the things that make them tick. But everyone also has baggage, hurts, traumas, and anxieties that they'd love to put down. These may be holding you back from being the person or leader that you could be. In Dr. John Delony's Bricks in Your Backpack workshop, we'll learn how to unpack that baggage so you can own your past and change your future. This isn't your typical leadership workshop because you're not just a typical leader. And stick around after you hear from Dr. John Delony because I'll be walking you through some reflection questions so you can quickly put what you learned into action. You've got what it takes and you're worth being well. Enjoy.
Hey, good folks, I'm Dr. John Delony, and thank you so much for joining me and this incredible team here today. I'm thrilled to connect with you, and I want to thank Smart Dollar for making this happen. And I want to let everybody know I've been where you are. HR folks, leaders out there, those of you who are responsible for walking alongside people in the messy moments, for doing the things that your bosses tell you to do, for having to deal with the realities of what those things look like with real people. It's tough, right? And according to our recent study here at the office, the number one cause of anxiety is financial stress. Right? Smart Dollar is Dave Ramsey's financial wellness benefit. Smart Dollar helps reduce employee stress related to money, which leads to happier, healthier, and more productive employees. Again, so I want to circle back and thank Smart Dollar for putting this on. So I think we're ready to rock and roll here. So let me start it this way. In third grade, I was in love with this, she was incredible. This beautiful fourth grade girl named Rhonda. And Rhonda had big red curly hair, and she had big giant glasses, and she was the only girl that would say hello to us. And I took that as a third grader to mean that we were going to be together forever. We were in love. And one day I was walking out of school, and I saw her playing with some of kids her own age in the school cafeteria. And remember the school cafeterias? They felt so cavernous. If you've ever gone back to visit your old elementary school, you realize how small that room is, right? It's so tiny now. But I was walking out of what felt like a giant cavernous cafeteria, and I looked over and saw Rhonda playing tag with people her own age. And I ran over just to join into the game. And I wasn't invited. I just ran in there like crazy. And everybody kind of paused and moved and looked away a little bit. But Rhonda, she played along. And she looked at me and said, "Ah!" And she pretended to run away, and she turned to take off. And I went to tag her, and I tagged her with these three little bony third grade fingers. And I could still feel it. I just tagged her, but I tagged her and I kind of pushed her. I didn't kind of push her. I for sure pushed her. But like push. And she was sprinting away from me, and she was also trying to cut a left turn because there was a giant brick wall there. And when I reached out to tag her and I pushed her, she smacked into that wall. And she crumbled to the ground, and it was one of those noises as a kid, like, ooh, that's not a good noise. But she stood up and turned, and she had broken both of her wrists. One was a compound fracture. There was a bone poking out. It was chaos, and I will never forget my body seizing up, her screams and her crying, and I just did what any third grader would do, and I just turned around and walked out the door and got on my bike, and I just drove home, and I started raking the yard, for God's sakes. I didn't know what to do, and my parents, in retrospect, said, we clearly knew something was up because you just came home from school and just started raking the yard, right? And then I was a high school teacher for several years after I graduated college, and I was what was wrong with the Texas education system. I was a coach and like a geography teacher, and so I would have a worksheet and then watch a movie and then have a worksheet, and then we'd watch like a National Geographic video of like lions eating things because that was nature and a lot to do with geography. And I would worksheet and then Happy Gilmore and then worksheet and Dead Poet Society because it had a school in it, right? That was the educational one, right? It was a disaster. And then my senior year in high school, back before I became a teacher, I was anchoring the mile relay. And my school had won 9 district track meets in a row. We were going for a decade sweep. And I dropped the baton. And we lost the meet by 1 point. I don't even know how you drop a baton in the mile relay because you're looking at the person. You're just staring right at them and they hand it to you. And I dropped it. And we lost by 1 point. To this day, the guy who was handing me the baton, I occasionally just text him and say, hey, you dropped it. And he'll write me back and be like, dude, 100% you did it. It's still in both of us. It just kills me. And then a few years ago, I was the dean of students at a law school. And it was like 11 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. And my schedule was such, like many of yours, when it was just back to back to back all day, every day. My admin started putting in bathroom breaks. And because my schedule was just so packed with important meeting and then a hard phone call and then dealing with a crisis, a student issue, and it was just going. And I talked too much. And so I'd gone from one meeting to the next and I was staying late after this meeting because I kept talking and I was sprinting. I had to go to the bathroom so bad. And I ran into the bathroom in my full suit and I had my cell phone out and I was going to try to get some texting done too. That makes sense. And so I'm not trying to be gratuitous here, but I went up to the urinal to go to the bathroom and I undid my belt and I was checking this and my mom had texted me. I didn't know my mom knew how text work. She does. And I was looking at the phone and it was benign. It wasn't anything big deal. It was just my mom texting. And I started going to the bathroom and I was looking at this text and I was trying to do too many things at once. And I realized really quickly, I had got the belt part undone. I had forgot to undo the pants part. And so here I am, the dean of students at a fancy law school in a suit. I'm in my mid-30s. It's like Tuesday, no tequila, no beers, just me. Just peeing my pants. And like Dumb and Dumber, when I just kept going. I just stood there at just everything just stopped. And then I thought I would just take my suit pants off and throw them away because I had some gym shorts in my bag. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm here to help people with their mental health and with their other challenges that are going on. And someone's going to find my suit pants in the trash. And then they're going to come tell me and say, somebody really needs help. To which I would have had to respond, you're correct. Somebody really needs help. And then just a few months ago, I have a 6-year-old little girl named Josephine. She's incredible. She's a human hurricane. And I was walking out of the house at about 5:15 in the morning. It was one of those weird mornings, if you've got kids, that they just pop open awake and it's going to be a long day, but they're just up and it's just not worth the fight. And so my daughter was sitting at the table eating oatmeal, and she was just eating oatmeal and coloring. And this is all I did. I just walked by and I kissed her on top of the head and said, good morning, baby, I love you. And then I started to walk out the door and I caught out of the corner of my eye this blonde mane, just all chaotic, all crazy, just flopping around. And she said in a rather dramatic voice, I wish you never existed. To which I was like, dang, Gina, that's a lot. That's a lot for 5:15 in the morning. And my wife almost came over the table on her. She's like, we don't talk like that to each other in this house. We treat each other with dignity and respect. And here's what my daughter said. She's 6 now. She was 5 at the time. She said, all he ever tells me is that I'm beautiful and tough and gritty and brilliant. I can't live like this anymore. I'm not going to take this. I looked at my wife and said, I have 2 PhDs and I never had that class in grad school. And I just walked out the door, right? And you and I, we could all, there's hundreds of people on this, on today's webinar. we could sit down for the next 5 years and just tell stories. In fact, it's one of my favorite things in the world to do is just to tell stories. But it's these stories, right? The bad situations, the time you asked him out and he said yes, and the time she said no, and it was devastating and you were excited. The time you came around the corner and you saw him wearing clothes that finally fit and you caught your breath, like, whoa. Or that time she looked at you and you knew, like, oh, it's for sure on, right? Or the time you got the job, you didn't get the job, you had to let that person go, and you had amped yourself up for it the night before so much, and ended up being pretty smooth. And that time that you thought, I got to let this person go today, and it was fine, and it turned into a disaster, right? It's these stories, big stories, little stories, all these stories, right? And so there's also these stories like what Dad said, and it's still in your head, right? So many years ago, and it still loops. Or when Mom slammed the cabinet and she was so mad and the handle came off of it. Or when Dad went to swat you, but he hit you a little bit too hard. You wrecked the car. Your checking account went negative for the first time. Stories. And so here at Ramsey Solutions, let me back up. For the last 20 years, before I came to work at Ramsey Solutions, I was a senior leader at multiple universities. And mostly in Texas and then here in Tennessee, here in Nashville. And so I've been leading teams. I've been dealing with HR issues. I've been dealing with the messiness of working and loving and caring for people and trying to create policies that keep everybody safe and whole and connected and included. And over the last 5 to 7 years, 8, 9 years, I've really doubled down on mental health and the mental health and wellness and relational wellness of leaders. And so today I'm going to combine those two things. We're going to talk about leadership and the work you do as HR professionals and your mental and relational health, because I think those things are intimately braided together. So let me back up. In 2010, I graduated with my big fancy first PhD in education. I was the most annoying, and you all know this person. Hopefully you aren't that person, but I for sure was. The annoying person who just gets out of grad school and has to tell everybody that they're in grad school. And the first thing you do after they graduate is they change their email signature. So it's comma, and it's got all these letters and after it, as many letters as you could cram on the email signature, right? I got my first big fancy PhD, and I was really annoying. And I was also really good at my job. And I would work really hard. I'd work late into the night. I'd get up really early. And you know that old, like, if you're not growing, you're dying. I was going to live forever because I was always growing, right? Workout programs, spiritual activities that were important to me, relationship stuff. I was always reading and listening to leadership speeches and podcasts back in the day, and the internet was relatively new, and so these new things were coming out all the time. I was just going, and I was all about promotions and leading it and crushing it and killing it, and how can I get this title to become this title? Ooh, I'm the assistant dean. How can I become the associate dean? And once I become the associate dean, it's like, how can I knock off the real dean? Just kidding. I don't want to be about killing, but it was just going. And then anytime a group would call, like a local police department, hey, you want to come out and speak for us? Absolutely, I'll be there. Hey, we've got a church program. I'll be there to speak to that. Hey, you got this leadership development thing? Yes, I do that. Hey, would you mind teaching a few graduate classes? I'm on it. I'll do everything. And I was running and going, hey, you just got accepted as program at Harvard. When you want to go? Absolutely, I'm in. And part of my job, not part of my job, almost all of my job, was dealing in the messiness of other people's lives, especially with my students and my staff and my students' families. And that meant I was in hospitals 2 or 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. I was the guy that called somebody's parents and said, hey, your son or daughter's in the ER and they're not expected to make the night. You need to get on a plane and come down here. I was the one telling somebody, hey, if you don't change the way you're acting here and the way you're talking to the people, you're not going to work here anymore. I'm the guy that we had to reduce a whole bunch of money and in our budgets, and that came out as people. I had to sit down with people who I knew had illnesses, I knew had family issues, and say, hey, your job's gone. You no longer have a position here, and we're gonna have to transition you out, right? And so I was going. I was also, my wife and I had racked up 6 figures in student loan debt. She was Dr. Delony before I was. And we just so much stress, and we couldn't have a baby, and we couldn't have a baby, and suddenly we have a baby, right? And so I was going. And listen, my dad was a police officer. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for most of my life before she went back to college. And so I didn't have a lot growing up. And so when I tell you the business of being Delony's was good, we had 2 incomes. I was working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. The business of being Delony's was good. And I lost my mind. I went all in and I went crazy. I wasn't well. I will never forget being spun out and exhausted and surrounded by people who loved me, yet feeling completely and totally alone. And there was years that I shared a bed with my wife, who I know loves me. We were 3 inches apart and I felt completely alone, totally alone. I had mastered the art of being surrounded by people, but being lonely, right? Being in a crowded space, yet being all by myself. And I was twisting all of my ideas. I was always in catastrophic thinking. I was always thinking the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. This is going to come down. This is going to come down. And I'll never forget walking across the lawn of the university that I worked at, stopping. And to this day, I don't know what prompted me, but I turned around and I walked back to the parking lot and I got in my wife's little Corolla and I drove 3 hours away to another town where I had a buddy who was a medical doctor. I had no appointment. I hadn't let him know. I just busted into his office, his clearly non-HIPAA compliant office. I remember his admin, his receptionist going, sir? And I just walked straight down the hall. And then he opened the door. And back then I had a reputation. I was a lot of energy. I was always running. And I had a reputation for being like, oh, here comes the party because Delony's here. And I opened his door and he said, hey, what's up? And I said, hey, I'm going crazy. I need you to listen to me. I'm not okay. And he tells me when he thinks about that, he still gets goosebumps because he said, I knew something wasn't okay. And he said, I'd never seen that side of you, but I knew for sure you weren't okay. And it was the first time in my life that I stopped talking from here because I talked a lot. And I started talking from here. And also, I had a wife and a kid and a career. And so I was going to have to change the oil on this car while it was driving. And by the way, this is the part of the Hollywood story where I run off and steal millions of dollars and go to jail and then come back with a big comeback story, or I cheat on my spouse, or I abandon my That makes for a good Hollywood story, but that's not most of our lives. Most of our lives settle in to that quiet, desperate, low-level dysthymia, that low-level anxiousness, that low-level, this is just the way this is going to be. And now we got a world where Netflix knows us better than we do. And, we don't even have to push play. They just start the next show for us. And they start the next show for us. And then YouTube says, hey, we know you better than you. Just here's some videos you're going to want to watch. And Bezos just has at the bottom of Amazon, it's like, here's some things you're probably going to want to buy. We know you. We've been following all your websites. We know what you like. Here's some stuff. And that's the world we've created for ourselves. And over the last 20 years, I've always been the young guy in the room, right? And I've had a ringside seat to watching people get everything, to finally get that presidency, to finally graduate as an attorney, to finally make partner, to finally go from director to associate vice president, and from associate vice president to senior VP. I've seen it. I've seen people go from not having very much money to becoming multimillionaires. Going. And I studied academically. When I went, my wife and I ultimately, we left that university. We took a $70,000 household income pay cut to go to a new university where I could work with a smaller group of students and I could start getting myself well. And it took several years of working I worked in the evenings with the police department doing death notifications. There was something about sitting with hurting people that was healing. It takes away your anxiety when you're sitting with somebody who's lost everything, right? And I began showing up to these moments in these scenes, and I began sitting with people behind closed doors. And academically, I was getting a second PhD in counseling because I just wanted to know what happened to me. And I wanted to know what happened to my marriage because my marriage is hanging on like by dental floss. And my friends were starting to get divorced, or they were starting to get in fights in my family and our country. I just wanted to know what was happening to everybody, right? And academically, I started studying doctors and lawyers and finance folks, leaders, right? College presidents, big fancy pastors, people who made it, people who other people went to when they needed help. And I hope that sounds familiar, because for the past almost decade now, I've been walking alongside and studying and sitting with you. I've been sitting with you. And most people don't know how lonely you are. And most people don't know how little you sleep. And most people don't know what it's like walking out of your CEO's office or one of the exec's office being told, here's what you're going to say. And you thinking to yourself, I don't know if I can say that and still look at myself in the mirror. And here's what I know about you, that you're working so hard. And you have this picture of the way things should be, and you are running, and you thought your marriage would look different, and you thought your sex life would look different, and you thought your job would look different. And the more I've researched you, and I've sat with people whose marriages are in a mist, or I've sat with police officers in one room doing an investigation where I'm hugging a mother who's holding me so tight I can barely breathe because her 4-year-old has passed away in this other room. This one neon sign just flashes that is stark and true. Winning won't make you well. But we live in a culture that is obsessed with winning and lasers and data and more algorithms, right? And it just goes, how can we move from here to here to here? And how can we do this? We need to build in this. And let me say this one more time. Winning won't make you well. And here's the annoying part. Even when you're winning, things can still go sideways, right? My wife and I, this is about a year ago, it was on the back end of what was the second or third or fourth round, I don't even know anymore, with COVID. And my radio show has done well, and the podcast has done well, and the speaking has done well. Like, things have transformed for our family. And Ramsey Solutions has been they've just transformed our lives. And we were sitting on the front porch of a house that our parents could have never wrapped their head around. And we were holding hands, and we were both crying because our friend Mark died. He was too young, man. And our other friend's marriage is just, it's a vapor. And we hadn't been on a date in what felt like years at that point because someone would get sick or the babysitter would get COVID or there'd be some thing here. And it was just going, and the political madness was nuts. And my daughter's clearly over me, right? And I used to be the chief student affairs officer at $1 billion university. And now, as my 12-year-old tells me, my son tells me, Dad, you're just a YouTuber, right? I don't know what to do with that. And here's our life. Winning won't make you well. And in counseling, we call it the tyranny of accomplishing all of your dreams, because the worst part of you, or the worst part of any new venture, let me say it that way, the worst part of any new title, any new policy, any new pat on the back from your CEO, or a thank you from your wife or your husband, the worst part about any of those things, of the new car, the new house, the new city, the worst part is that you go with you. You go with you. You get in that new car. You get out of bed with that person that is not who you're married to. You get the keys to that big new house. And what's wrong with you? Nothing. You're beautifully and wonderfully made. You're awesome. But if I was to just there's hundreds of people on this, if I was just to line you all up and we were to be here in person and I was just to hold your face and just look you in the eye and say, hey, you're worth being well and I love you. Almost every single one of you would look at the floor, say something like, oh, I got a great team, I got great support back at home, and you would deflect, or you'd steer a hole through me because it'd be so awkward. Some of you, if I touched your face, you would just go rigid. Why? It's these stories, right? It's these stories. The stories you were born into, the stories you were told, those stories of the things that you actually did in real life that we need to take ownership of. And those things all become the stories we tell ourselves. And we carry on these stories. So let me show you this. I like to call these stories bricks. And I think that all of us are born with a backpack. And I think we have this backpack on 24/7, 365. We always have this thing. And these stories are bricks, right? Some of these, you were born and dad left. He didn't show up. You were born into deep poverty. You were the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood in the wrong place, and people treated you differently for something as absurd as the color of your skin. It's just disgusting. Some of you were born with bricks already in your backpack. Others, dad had a heart attack. Mom got sick. Both mom and dad worked a lot, and they were never around. And over time, we just carry these things, right? These bricks. And look, some of these things that we carry with us, they're nothing. They're like little pieces of paper, right? Some of these stories are something silly. Like when my wife and I got married, like I'll never forget, she was brushing her teeth. And because she's a serial killer, she put the toothpaste directly on her toothbrush and then just shoved it in her mouth. And clearly she hates babies or whatever. I looked at her and I was like, you're doing that wrong. And she's brilliant. And she's like, I don't think this is a thing you do wrong, genius. And I said, yes, you have to put the toothpaste on the toothbrush and then put it under the water first. Lunatic. We just did it different, right? Like, this is the right way. No, that's the right way. That's the cool thing about living in a residence hall, right? In a dorm in college is you'd be like, this is how you do Christmas. And then you find out, nope, this is how we did Christmas. That's how you do. Oh, you don't even do Christmas. Cool. And you learn about new people and new things in this inclusive world. It's incredible, right? So some things we're just learning as we go. Other things are a little bit bigger deal, but I'm not a good driver. We're not a math family, right? We're not good at math. We don't drive cars like that. We don't drive cars like that, right? There's these stories that we're told, these things that get dropped in our back, and we don't even know that we're carrying them. Some of these bricks are trauma. And we think of trauma like the big thing, right? We all know what that word means. It's the car wreck, right? It's the nurse. The school counselor comes and gets you when you're a kid, and she takes you down to her office, and she holds your hand in the hallway, and she opens up her office door, and your mom is in there, and she's crying, and the assistant principal's in there, and she's got tears in her eyes, and she sits down, and she puts her hand on your knee and says, your daddy's had a heart attack, and he has died, right? That's big T trauma, big stuff. But a friend of mine, Dr. Lynn Jennings, was a secondary traumatic stress researcher, and she just told me something that changed my life. She said, yeah, John, trauma can be acute. It can be big. But it can also be cumulative. It can also be secondary. Just a bunch of small stuff, one after the other. So it might be that there was a big divorce. It might be that you were neglected and you didn't have food. It might be that you grew up around people who didn't like you because of the way you looked. But it also could have been, hey, you walk down the steps and you're 11 years old and you love your new shirt and your mom, she's just trying to help. Literally, she's just trying to help. She looks at you and goes, oh, honey, you look pudgy in that shirt. We want the boys to like us, right? Let's don't wear that shirt. Let's go change that shirt. And you're 11 and you say, okay, Mom. And from that moment forward, you realize that your beauty is determined by how other people see you, not from here. Or you're a 5-year-old little boy just being goofy like little boys are, and you run through your kitchen and you bam your head on the counter and you start crying and you hold it really tight and your dad looks at you and says, hey, suck it up. That doesn't hurt. You're fine. And you're 5 and you think to yourself, it does hurt. But I want to be like him. He's probably right and I'm probably wrong. And that's the first tiny little crack in your belief in yourself and your belief in how you feel. And what you're going to do for the rest of your life is outsource your feelings to other people. Who do we all hate together? Who are we mad at? How do we feel? Because I know one thing. I can't trust me. Or in my house, the one I'm most guilty of is just sitting there on that stupid little device, just scrolling and scrolling. And my little daughter, Josephine, will come up and say, hey, Daddy, look at this. Look what I drew. And I'll glance at it, and it's some kind of wolf dragon thing. I don't know what she's talking about. I don't have any idea what's happening in her head. And I go, yeah, it's incredible. And she goes, no, look. And I said, I did. I looked at it. It's cool. I'm just scrolling. And what she doesn't have as a 6-year-old is the words to tell me, hey, idiot, I'm growing up fast. And whatever's on that stupid Instagram box of yours is not as important as me. I'm your daughter. She doesn't know that. What she does know is that something in that box is more beautiful and more important to her dad than she is. And she's going to spend the rest of her life trying to bridge that gap, trying to move it over. So what am I trying to say? Whether you've had big stuff or a ton of little stuff. By the way, if you have hard conversations with people for a living, which I would be willing to bet 99% of people on this webinar do, people hand you their bricks for a living. And we just put them in our bags and we carry them and we carry them. And maybe we don't carry the whole brick, we just carry a piece of it. But over time, whether it's 5 or 6 cinder blocks or it's just a bag of little pebbles, the weight of that bag is the same. The weight of that bag is the same. And our knees hurt and our backs hurt and our necks hurt. And the doctors say, I don't know. And our blood pressure's like crazy and we eat terrible. We don't move and we're snapping at people that we know love us and that we love. And if there was one word to describe us all, we would all say, I'm tired. And the word beneath that we don't like to say that's more true than tired is we're just so lonely. And our bodies respond to this stuff. And do we fight? Do we run? Right? Our bodies just freeze, right? No, man. They're going and going and going and going and going. And listen, we're not hanging out with our friends anymore. We're not taking care of our bodies. We're not in romantic relationships. We're not playing with our kids. We just hand them digital babysitters now. And I don't think it's because we're broken. I think it's because of all this junk we're carrying around. School got busy. We had a side hustle going. We had to work from home and then back. And then mom is sick and dad drinks too much. And we haven't had sex with our spouse in weeks that turn into months. And we start wondering, maybe it's me, right? Is it me? And we're repeating these stories in my head. So this is the part of the webinar when you're like, all right, dude, what are we talking about? Why are we talking about this? I'll say this as boldly as I can. You cannot be a leader who leads well, who truly, compassionately cares and loves for their employees. You cannot be a present father or mother or romantic partner if you are not well. And you can't be well unless you deal with the bricks in your backpack. You can't honor and love your families or lead with any sort of strength or competency or dignity or respectability if you're not well. You will never look yourself in the eyes in the mirror if you are not well, right? And so to be a good romantic partner and a leader, you must deal with the bricks in your backpack. You can't run around carrying this stuff or you're going to fry the people in your life. You're going to melt yourself and you're going to end up, as we said earlier, in that quiet life of desperation. That this is just the way this is. That crazy season that turned into a crazy couple of years that turned into your life. Turned into your life. So, to deal with your bricks, you've got to own your stories. You got to own your actions and you got to own your thoughts. Remember this, our childhood biography becomes our adult biology. And that means if you haven't dealt with the childhood traumas or the neglect you faced from your parents or the sexual assault, if you still see yourself as that kid in the elastic jeans, right? The husky jeans, your body will continue to respond for years and years and years. How many of you instantly turn 7 again when your dad calls? Or when your mom says, well, I guess I just won't eat anything for Thanksgiving this year because I guess I just, and you instantly turn into a 9-year-old and try to take responsibility for her. How many of you have been so angry the last few years? You are fighting everyone. Whether in real life, whether on the internet, whether on thumbs downing things on Twitter. How many of you are completely frozen inside? Think about, watch my hands here. Like when I'm pushing down my feelings and my emotions, I'm compressing or I'm depressing them. And many of us have been dead and dying inside for years because in our lives, the threats never go away. The clicks and the emails and the dings and the economy and the politics, it just keeps going and going and going. And so we remain dead and frozen or enraged or angry. And all the while, the alarms just go and go and go and go and go. So what do we do? These stories, these bricks, they get real heavy. You know there's too many bricks in your backpack when you start saying things like, if they would just, and I don't care who they is, I don't care what just is. When you've distilled the world down into a single bad actor and a single explanation, the world's too complex for that. If you find yourself with no real relationships, lonely in a crowded room, if you find yourself at a little league game and you are enraged and or yelling at the high school kid who's the umpire, that's not his problem, that's your problem. Or if somebody cuts you off in traffic and you instantly make up a story about them, about how they're doing drugs and they don't care about it and they're trying to kill everybody, instead of instantly closing your eyes when whispering a quick prayer to the universe, let this guy make it to the hospital so he can see his wife before she passes, because I get to pick which story I make up. But if I find myself defaulting to rage, if I'm anxious and snapping at people that I love, when I'm ruminating and I just start telling the same story over and over and over. Hey, listen, if you get nothing out of this, just know this. Rumination and worry solve nothing. They solve nothing. It feels like productive thinking, like we're thinking through hard things into the future. But how many of us have had hard conversations with people in our heads that we will never have in real life? We have these imaginary fights with people that we always win, by the way. We always get these dope mic drop moments. We're like, yeah, we're never going to have that conversation in real life. If my boss, I'm going to tell him, you're not going to tell him anything. You know what I mean? Or what happens if the economy collapses? Then we start trading coffee and bullets and sand for money. And then what if a meteorite comes? It's not helping. It's just spinning our bodies back up, dumping cortisol and adrenaline into our bodies, putting us into fight or flight or freeze. And now we can't make good choices. We can't be kind and present. We can't be thoughtful because our bodies are at war. We have to deal with these bricks in our backpack. So really quickly, I'm going to give you a couple of things on how to go through this. Here's the first one. You have to be willing to open up this bag, examine these stories, and demand evidence. Are these true? I wish I had something cooler than this, but I carry this with me everywhere. I put some cool stickers on it that make me feel like tougher and stuff, and I play guitar, so I got like a guitar thing because I'm cool. And it's really just a small journal that I have in my backpack, and I write down when the crazy thoughts come and they won't leave. I get them out of my body, and I look at them and say, am I really the worst father ever? Ever? Really? Here's a couple of the bricks in my backpack. One of them is that I hurt kids. When I was 9, I pushed a little girl and she broke her arms. And to this day, when a kid comes running up to me to give me a hug, my first impulse is to back up. Kids aren't safe around me. Another brick in my backpack is that when it all's on the line and we need Delony to step up, he's going to screw it up. He'll screw it up. You know, the first thought I had when my daughter told me that she wished I never existed, I walked outside and I thought, yeah, because you suck at being a dad. That was my first thought. I'd been on the road a lot. I'd been busy here at the office. I had a book deadline due. And I let the judgment of a 5-year-old. We don't let her buy beer. We don't let her drive or buy weapons. We don't let her buy cigarettes. But I let her speak into my life. You want to know why I work in mental health? Because when I was a high school teacher, remember Dead Poet Society? I pushed play on the VCR back then after an exam that I gave. And in Dead Poet Society, one of the main character wants to be an actor and his dad wants him to be a doctor, lawyer, whatever. And they get in a big fight, and the dramatic crux of the movie, the young man takes his life, and then Robin Williams, the wonderful teacher, is fired. And it's a sad yet inspiring story. I pushed play, and a young little boy went home, got in a fight with his dad, was a star athlete. And if you want to know why I work in mental health, because somewhere way in the back of my backpack is a brick that says, man, if you just hadn't have pushed play, that little boy would be a grown man, maybe would have some kids right now, but that little boy took his life. And so I've got to examine these stories. Are you really a terrible kisser? Is everything really the government's fault? Do you think you're not stupid? Do you think you're the second coming of Jesus? You're not. Like, write all of these down, feel them, and demand evidence. Are they true? And are they true? Right? Right? Are they true? And your bricks are going to look different than mine. Some of them are childhood trauma, marriage issues, or we found family members that are way different from us politically. We found racist spouses, weight and health issues, alcohol, pornography, insecurities, cheating on your spouse, right? Like, what is it? But pick them up and call them out. Is this true? Is this true, right? And what's not important is the facts of these stories aren't as important as what they are doing to your body in the present. Some of the great trauma research out now is less about the stories of the things that happen. What is that story doing to my body right now? What is it doing to me right now? And listen, I have to own it. I pushed Rhonda. I pushed play on that movie, right? You were abused. She cheated on you. You got fired. He yelled at you. Those things happen. There's a period at the end of that sentence, and we spend so much energy trying to edit sentences that have already been written. And what the world is so desperate for is a group of us to stop trying to edit sentences that have already been written and to write something new, to ask ourselves that one terrifying, crazy, scary question: what are we going to do now? Because that's where the hard work is, but that's also where the healing is. Okay? All right, the next one is you have to make a plan to set these down. And I don't know what your plan is. Your plan may be yoga, it may be working out. I think everybody should be lifting weights. That's a whole other conversation. Even people who's like, I don't lift weights. You should. Whether that's getting together with your spouse regularly and doing a budget, whether that's getting the right tools in your life that are going to allow you to have some ease, whether that's paying all your debts off, whether that's getting out of a toxic work environment, getting out of an abusive relationship. I don't know what those things are, but you have to have a plan to set these down. How often have we got out of our last meeting and we drive home and we're driving too fast and we listening to politic, whatever, we pull into the driveway and we see our kids trike and we hit it with a car, we run over a ball, and then our little daughter comes running down the sidewalk and says, Dad! And I open the door and the first thing I do is say, I told you to pick your trike up. See? That wasn't about her. That was about me. That was about me. Start a meditation practice or a journaling practice. Create a morning routine. Go see a counselor. Have a plan to set these down. And here's the third one. Oh, let me just say this. One of them was, one of the things in your plan to set these down is being honest about what you need. And I'll never forget the shame. My marriage was, it was hanging on, by a spider's web. And my wife and I got in a room and basically decided, like, are we gonna keep doing this? Or, because if we're gonna stay together, we're gonna have to excavate everything and build something totally new. And the shame I felt and how scared I was when I looked at her and said, I just need you to say that you're proud of me. I'm a 6'2", 195-pound Texas male. My dad was a homicide detective and he worked SWAT. I didn't have a roadmap for looking at my wife and saying, I just want you to be proud of me. To which she replied, I wish you had told me that 15 years ago. I would have told you that every day because I'm so proud of you. But part of having a plan, saying out loud, what do I need? What do I want with my one teeny tiny reckless life? What do I want? The last thing here, number 3, is you have to invest in relationships. You cannot do this alone. We're designed to be in community, together, in little tribes of people who somebody's got security, somebody's taking care of the food, somebody's helping with the clothes, somebody's helping with the kids. Our bodies are wired to be in community, in person, in the same room with other people. And we are the single loneliest generation in human history. We have tons of information that we text back and forth to each other, but our brains are screaming for connection. And it was interesting. I said my dad was a homicide detective. It hit me a few months ago. When you're in prison and you get in trouble, what's the last ditch thing they can do to you? How do they punish you in prison? ISO, the hole. They make you be alone. And for some reason, we've done that to ourselves. Other people are your emergency fund for life, because I don't care how much money you have, at some point you're going to get the call that your mom's passed away. I don't care how nice your car is, at some point you're going to have a conversation in your marriage that takes your breath away. We're all one phone call away from having everything in our lives be different. We're all one flat tire from having everything go sideways. Other people are your emergency fund for life. And I've found making friends at 30, at 40, it's a disaster. It's the worst. But I have to. And I'll leave you with this, and then we'll go to questions. A great mentor of mine once told me this piece of wisdom that has just resonated through my heart and soul of the last decade. The air we breathe, the water we drink, our current ethos of the day is that cynicism and pessimism so often present themselves as wisdom. And optimism and hope and joy, those are for crazy people. Those are for the idiots, the uninformed, the fools. If you ask me what the single greatest psychological finding of the last 100 years, I would point you to Martin Seligman's work. We used to think in the psychology world that people were just born Eeyore, or they were born happy. Ta-da! And what he found is that pessimism and optimism were learned behaviors. And what that ultimately means is pessimism is a choice. Optimism is a choice. And as the great Brene Brown says, whatever I go looking for, I am sure to find. So I can spend my days not dealing with these bricks, spending my days alone, spending my days focusing on what's wrong in the world and where I'm trapped and where my life sucks and where things are hard. Or I can make the decision to do a different kind of hard. Carrying these bricks around every day is hard. Dealing with the bricks, it's hard. I get to choose my hard. And I can look for beauty. And I can look for moments of levity and laughter. And I can smile. And I can high five people. I can write thank you notes. I can tell my spouse I'm sorry, I'm ready to do better. I can ask for forgiveness and go again. I can seek joy. I get to choose that. So I'll tell you as we wrap up, choose joy. Choose optimism. Choose hope. And now we're going to build a life with the action, or like we got to backfill that life with the actions that are going to help us get there.
Now, I want to encourage you to take a minute to reflect with a few questions. First, based on what Dr. John Delony said, can you identify any bricks that are in your backpack? Take 30 seconds right now and write down what comes to mind. If you need longer, feel free to pause the video. Second question, how have those bricks potentially held you back? How have they prevented you from growing or moving forward. Last question. What do you plan to do to put down the bricks, heal, and move forward? What kind of results do you expect to see? Okay, that concludes this workplace wellness workshop. Thanks so much for watching and following along. Be on the lookout for more workshops just like this one, sponsored by Smart Dollar.